Buckle up. Today we're going into the details of how a recession works, how it impacts Magic the Gathering. That's all. 4 parts to this video. First, how does a recession work? Second, where does Magic fit in? Third, the macroeconomics view of a recession. And then the fourth is how that macroeconomics perspective helps us understand better what, of course, theoretically, economically, will happen to Magic the Gathering markets in the event of a recession. Right, so how does a recession work? So first off, the basics. I think most people have this kind of idea of mechanics down, but for those of you who didn't know, it's called, one of the things that's called is the paradox of thrift. And the idea here is that one person's spend is another person's wages. And so I think this is pretty intuitive, but when you go and buy a taco from Taco Bell, that money does in part go to some rent-owning corporate son of a gun, but also it pays an employee who then uses the money that they get paid to buy their dogs dog treats. And that money goes, yes, in part to some rent-owning corporate son of a gun, but for the most part, actually most of the money goes to people who make the dog treats, and then so on and so forth. So if you don't buy the taco, the person's dog is going to starve, right? It's just how it works. I don't make the rules here. I'm being funny, but so you see this chain reaction, right? When people stop spending money for whatever reason, people that depend on that money for their livelihood aren't getting that money. And therefore they're going to have to cut back on their spend. And so now, not only is the person's dog starving, but the person who works for the dog biscuit making company isn't able to buy their new Xbox or whatever's cool these days. And therefore, anyways, you get it. You get the point. Chain reaction, and it gets bad. It gets bad quick. Part of the reason it gets bad quick is because it feeds on itself, right? So you can imagine a loop where I don't pay you any money because I'm nervous about the economy. So you're not getting paid as much. You then don't pay your person very much money or any money because you're short on cash. And let's say that person pays me. That person's a buyer of my business. And so it's this kind of vicious cycle, right, that's going to do a few things. And we're not going to get into all the details, but from a big perspective, what's going on here with a recession is there's some sort of demand shock. Something happens, step one, that causes people to feel iffy about spending their money. There's a demand shock that leads to decreased spend. Less money out there being spent on less goods, less services. Then what we would expect to happen is that prices go down for everything. Prices go down for everything, and that would actually fix it. Ironically, or I guess theoretically, is that in this recession cycle where it's like, I'm not paying you, you're not paying your guy, that guy's not paying me. If prices go down, it fixes it. Confidence is restored to some degree. At least you're like, oh, the taco's only $1 now instead of $4.99. I can go back to buying tacos, and that's the idea. What prevents that from happening is something called sticky wages, which is especially prominent in the great US of A. But it's true other places in the world too. And the idea here is that in order for a recession to just lower prices, it would have to lower all prices, which includes the price of labor. And that's wages, how much people get paid. There's this legend, and I can't verify that this is true, but I'm pretty sure this happened. This was in 2008 with this kind of worldwide Great Recession. A German car manufacturer leveled with their employees and said, hey, look, this is the deal. Us in corporate, we've got 2 choices. We could fire y'all, or we could cut everyone's pay for the next, we think it's going to last 18 months. What should we do? And people are like, you know what? Some pay is better than no pay. I'd rather keep my job and have our wages cut. And they did. And guess what? They all kept their jobs, and that was fine. I tell that story because it's rare. It's a rare thing. Usually, when any corporation or company or whatever are like, how are we going to cut expenses? It isn't by temporarily or permanently lowering wages, it's by firing people. When you fire people, that has a much greater impact on their income than just lowering their wages. And so this concept called sticky wages describes the reason why unemployment goes up with recessions, which further kind of makes these recessions sticky wages. So fun facts, fun concepts. Well, and so that leads to less spend. Makes sense. How does magic tie into this? Well, something called the lipstick effect. This is a concept that was coined after recession in 2001 and after 9/11. It was understood that the sales of lipstick was not going down. Sales in lots of products and lots of industries were going down, but lipstick was doing quite well. And particularly inexpensive lipstick. That's an important detail for this lipstick effect. And this concept, which by the way isn't just uncontroversial, economists do like have some counter examples and reasoning against this, but in general, as a rule, if there's a recession, people don't stop spending money on the things they love. They might spend less money, so they might go for a cheaper version of the product because that's what they saw was inexpensive lipstick was doing particularly well, but the lipstick was still selling. So deemed the lipstick effect, this concept that in recessions, people still spend money on the things they love. We saw this in 2008, the Great Recession, especially with movies. Movie sales went up. People enjoy getting out of the house, getting entertainment. And you can see how this ties into magic, but this lipstick effect definitely applies to magic. Magic, depending on how you play it, I don't know if this is true for myself, but magic can be a relatively inexpensive hobby, as in how much you pay for how much you can play, right? You can buy a collection for a few $100 and in theory make relatively infinite decks, commander decks, whatever, out of that collection. Now, if you're like me, you're a greedy son of a gun who has to go onto, whatever, Moxfield or EDH Rec, and you look up deck lists and you're like, oh, what? A new Smog came out that creates treasure tokens? I need 2 copies for my decks or whatever. Not an inexpensive hobby. But in theory, you should be able to buy magic cards and play with them a lot. If you compare it to something like a movie is one of the most expensive hobbies for how much you pay for how many hours of entertainment, assuming you're going to movie theaters. So when you compare magic to that, you can buy a deck. Yes, that deck costs, that modern deck costs $600. But if you're going to play that modern deck at 2 tournaments a week for the next, 4 months or whatever, it works out. Now, I know you're saying nobody does that. They buy 5 modern decks and you rotate between them and blah, blah, blah. Yes, I'm saying magic could be a relatively inexpensive hobby. And it does fit the bill for what the lipstick effect is talking about, which is that it's something it's a stress relief. It's a social thing. That's another, social hobbies do particularly well in recessions for some reason. People lean towards cheaper, at home, as well as social entertainment. And Magic the Gathering fits the bill. And so from one perspective, when you zoom out and you say, hey, how's a recession going to affect Magic the Gathering? The answer is not too much. People who are passionate about Magic and spend money on Magic are going to continue to be passionate about Magic and spend money on Magic. So you could end the video right there, but we're going one step further, one step deeper, because that answer is misleading, or at least partially misleading. Let me show you the macroeconomic pie. I've shown it on this channel before, but bear with me. This is the macroeconomic pie. It's the macroeconomic pie for 2024. Is this United States? Oh yeah, here we go. So what is the macroeconomic pie? Well, it describes every productive dollar in the United States of America, and dollars represent something. It's not just this, people will like, well, we left the gold standard and now the dollar's worthless. Dollars represent something. Yes, they get inflated away, but they represent productive work. People do productive work for dollars. And there's so many dollars that get spent on productive work because there's only so much productive work, right? So technically we could print the dollar to oblivion, but we haven't done it yet, kind of. And so when we say, hey, we spent, $1 million on whatever childcare in the city of Virginia Beach or whatever in the past year, it's obviously more than that, but you get the point. That's saying that like, hey, this much productive capital was used towards this one thing. And that's what this chart is describing, which is that out of all the productive dollars in the United States, here are some large categories of where that money's going. The blue, the biggest part, is consumption. That is normal people, well, I guess people in general, we're all normal people in some ways, I guess, spending money on things, on food, on clothing, on recreation, on, your house. Just like, this is the money to live and day to day what you're doing to just enjoy life. That is the bulk of all the productive capital in the economy is spent on consumption, right? Investment is much more interesting and nuanced. Investment is what you think of as like, oh, I'm going to invest in Google. I'm going to invest in Apple. Like, yes, that is investment, but a lot of investment is, of course, passive. You invest in your 401k, and that money goes towards, whatever, S&P 500 or whatever index of companies that are interesting to you or to the fund. And then there's money that isn't even actively invested, but is just passively saved. So if you have a savings account at a bank and you put in $1 million, you're doing quite well. Congratulations. I hope you feel like you're doing well. That $1 million, you can say like, oh, it's just in the savings account, it's just sitting there. I haven't invested it in anything. Well, guess what? The bank takes that money and they're legally required to keep some of the money in the bank, so to speak. So they'll take, if you put in $1 million, they'll take 100,000 and put it in a corner. They'll take the other 900,000 and they will they will buy debt. I mean, they will buy cars for people, or they'll buy houses for people. They will invest in small businesses and startups. They might buy stocks and bonds and whatever. But any money that's being saved and kept at a bank is being used productively, at least the majority of it. If you really want to take money out of the economy, you just got to stuff it in your mattress. That way you can make sure that it's not being invested. It's not being used in anything productive. But yeah, all savings that's touching the financial system at all is part of investment. Investment, as a side note, is what makes the future, by the way. If investment is strong, our future is strong. You can think of this as the more money that there is being invested in companies and in individuals who have great ideas, the more cool things can be invented and created. And so, in theory, if we do a good job investing now, saving money now, buying stocks and bonds and whatever now, our kids are much more likely to have flying cars and I don't know what, like teleporters. I don't know, just whatever the cool stuff is that you want your kids to have in the future. In a macroeconomic sense, if we can incentivize people to save their money now, that's how we're going to get there in the future. Right. Okay. What does this have to do with magic? Okay. There's a couple more slices. Government spending, which is government spending. Pretty self-explanatory. There's exports, which is what we're selling to other countries. And there's imports, what we're buying from other countries. And we're going to kind of ignore the imports exports thing. They kind of net out anyways. But government spend just happens. It's all the people that are paid by the government, all the contracts and whatever. The people man, the people who get paid to clean the reflection pool in DC, what are you doing? And also, like, can I do that? Can I get $1 million contract and just be in charge of cleaning a pool? I'll be out there 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for $1 million. Like, I'd do it. Anyway, right. So what does this have to do with Magic? I guess first off, let's talk about recessions. What does this have to do with the recession? Well, when a recession happens, what we observe from a macroeconomic sense is that consumption doesn't decrease. This big blue piece stays about the same. Turns out that whether you have a good job or not, you still need to eat, and you still need games on your phone, and you still need... So the consumption stays the same. That's what we observe. And in theory, Magic spending stays the same too, which is where we're getting into. Investment is actually what goes down. When the economy is rough, people don't want to invest as much money into stocks and bonds and things. And you can listen to Rudy and Alpha Investments and others talk about how stupid that is, because during the recession is often when you can get investments for relatively cheap. You know, there's oversized returns to the money you invest in during a recession because other people aren't investing. But that's just what we see happens, is that investment goes down during a recession. Government spending stays the same, although often government spending will increase. You know, they'll try to spend more money to stimulate the economy. Yeah. Okay. So that's what this has to do with the recession. Now, what does this have to do with Magic the Gathering? Well, think about consumption as players in Magic the Gathering, and think about investment as, you know, investors, collectors, the hardcore, you know, like, this is my Magic the Gathering portfolio folk. In a recession, most certainly, just like in a macroeconomic sense, that consumption stays relatively flat and investment decreases, we will see that the players and people who enjoy Magic the Gathering, you know, Magic is life kind of folks like myself, will continue to spend money on cards, open packs, play with decks, compete in tournaments, whatever. There's obviously going to be some significant number of people who liquidate their collections in order to raise money to make up for a hard time. But we wouldn't expect that to dramatically decrease the price of cards, because the demand for those cards from real players is still there, and strong. So you would expect a increase in supply of cards because people are selling their collections to decrease the price somewhat, but not that significantly. Overall, consumption in Magic stays the same. Investment in Magic is what changes. The people who are buying cases of collector booster boxes because they know the price is going to go up in the future feel more iffy about that being true when there's a recession. People who will buy people's collections at inflated prices because they're confident they're able to resell those cards instantly and make a good money, they will be less confident about their ability to do so in a recession. And so this investment bucket for Magic is what gets impacted. And that's as a kind of, you know, final visual, what I want to bring up is this Hobbit collector booster display, which has, despite my predictions, continued to basically raise in price or stay the same. I guess we'll see really once, like a week or two after release, but I predicted that this will not hold $800-900. The pre-sale price suggests otherwise. But anyways, this price is not because of just players. And we all know this, right? There's hype around Lord of the Rings, Magic the Gathering products. And people expect that something that is Lord of the Rings adjacent is going to perform well as an investment, as a Magic the Gathering investment item in the medium to long term. If there were no investors, this is dramatic, but if there were no investors that thought that this box was going to perform well, it would be much cheaper than it is today. That would remove not the majority, but a significant enough chunk of the demand that would decrease prices in a big way. I don't have any real numbers to back this up, but I imagine the number that comes to my mind just intuitively is this would be a $600 box or even a $500 box if we were in a recession. If people were not confident about the future of Magic the Gathering product prices. But people are. And so instead, what we have is $840 on TCG Player. You can get it cheaper on Mana Pool or eBay because it's not a pre-sale item there. Everyone can sell them there. But anyways, that's the point. Is that recessions for Magic the Gathering will not tank all demand. It's not going to tank all the prices. You would expect some prices to fall because people are liquidating collections and need to raise money. But in general, Magic is a robust product that people enjoy and will want to enjoy during a recession, where I would expect there to be the greatest weakness in pricing and kind of fall in pricing would be with the new stuff that comes out. There not being nearly as much demand for things like collector booster boxes because the collector investors are not going to be there as strong as there would be without the recession. So let me know if you agree. Thanks for watching and subscribe. Thanks to my generous patrons for making this content especially possible. And I will see y'all in the next one. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Peace.